Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me okay? Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today for this very special Arboretum Speaker Series. My name is Mike Klabmeyer. I'm the Associate Vice President for Facilities and Campus Planning here at Hamilton College, and it's my distinct pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker. But before we do, I just wanted to ask, through a show of hands, how many folks here think that Hamilton's campus is objectively beautiful? I'm pandering. Yes. Trick question. Actually, there's only one correct answer. It is in fact objectively beautiful. And in fact, when I first drove up the hill a little more than a year ago, as I was intending to meet with my prospective employers, it was that beauty that just enraptured me, and that first impression just drew me in, and I've been here ever since, and have no intention of leaving. The campus, any campus really, is a special place because I think college campuses they just have this way of providing a sense of place like no other, that just lets you know that when you're there, it's special and it's unique and it fills you with memories, and certainly Hamilton is no exception, you know. And frankly, I think I'm a little biased, but I think it's a leader in the field. And while it has so much going for it, like anything, there's always room for improvement, right? There's always things that we could be doing better. And as we strive for excellence, what we did back in 2020 is we reached out to some of the best in the business in landscape architecture, STIMSON Landscape Architects in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and asked for their help to envision a future that, you know, allowed us to swing for the fences and to see, you know, what new heights we could achieve. And of course, you all remember 2020. Little pandemic that slowed things down, and certainly it slowed down the landscape master plan as well. So took a little hiatus, but then picked back up in 2022. And just a few months ago, recently finished the plan, and the report is final. And Glen Valentine, the principal landscape architect on that project, is here with us today to talk through the initiative and all that took place in that planning process to get to an ultimate vision for the future. And I just want to emphasize one thing: as exciting as it is that what the things that you're going to see here that we hope to achieve, they are conceptual. Many of them are ambitious, some are downright aspirational. So don't think that you're going to come back next year and see all of this. Okay, this is going to take time. It's going to take fundraising. It's going to take a lot of effort to make it happen. But this is really the direction that we want to head. So, and the thing I love about Glen's work and this presentation is that if you are not familiar with this campus's history, Glen and his team started by understanding where we were before we decide where we're going. You know, taking a look at all the deliberate decisions across all the eras of Hamilton's history to identify key principles that are consistent throughout Hamilton's history as really anchors for moving forward. So while we definitely have this grand plan to make Hamilton's campus better than it's ever been, it's rooted in those principles that ultimately are going to make this future uniquely Hamilton. So with that, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the Arboretum Speaker Series, Mr. Glen Valentine from STIMSON Landscape Architects.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for that very gracious introduction. As Mike mentioned, I'm gonna take you this afternoon through the process, which was about a 2-year process of how we arrived at the suggestions and landscape initiatives, which I'll present at the end of the presentation. But sec here. A little trouble advancing here. Sorry, Mike.
That's right. Talk about yourselves. We're denied. There we go. Okay.
Thanks, Jane. No problem.
Oh, it's not letting you go at all. Oh.
Just use that.
Okay.
All right. All right, start over. All right, so first I'm going to take you through the principles, as Mike described, that we discovered through our history, our analysis of the history of the campus, and how they've kind of guided the development through to the present day. Then we're going to talk about priorities that we came across or discovered as we worked with various people, mostly facilities, but also throughout the campus community, the landscape priorities that really needed to be addressed first and foremost. And then at the end, I'm going to get to planning and some of the larger initiatives that we're thinking of for the campus. But to start off, we're going to talk about history. And when we started this process, we were working with a historian, Ethan Carr, who helped us really take a deep dive into the history of the college. And we ended up dividing it up into these 5 eras: the early era, the horticultural campus, campus Gothic, the modern campus, and the contemporary campus. And I'll run through this briefly to just tell you about the main components and really the main people who were involved in each one of these specific eras of the college's development. The first era we're calling the early era, from 1792 to 1853. Was really the time of Samuel Kirkland, who was the founder of Hamilton College. And he started down in the valley in Clinton at a little cabin down where he started his school. But within 6 years, he had moved to the top of the hill to the present location of Hamilton College, which has this spectacular view over Clinton and the Oriskany Valley, and started his Oneida Hamilton Academy at that location. And it was really that vista and his decision to have this kind of incredible view over the valley that decided where Hamilton College is today. And you can see this arrangement that he developed once he started with one building, and the original academy is actually that square, which is dashed right in the middle, right next to the chapel, was the original building, which didn't survive. But once you went to the top of the hill, the college developed rapidly along this ridge. And this was really the style of the day. Yale had just started what was called finished the Yale Row in New Haven. And it had a tremendous influence on college planning throughout the United States. Most of the young colleges were really trying to emulate this row of buildings. And what that did is it gave a young college its sort of largest presence and largest appearance to really magnify the importance and the identity of the college. So you had this row growing along the top of the ridge. And all of these colleges also had a green space, this kind of front lawn, this enclosed front lawn, which was, the original space for students, and it is ubiquitous throughout all of the early colleges and becomes sort of the prototype for later green spaces you'll see as the college evolves. You'll also see that the chapel is in the very center of this arrangement, and that was very much on purpose because Samuel Kirkland's Academy and early Hamilton, as in all colleges of this era, were really religious in nature, fundamentally religious, and it was founded to convert Native American people in the area to Christianity, but in general to teach Christian values along with a very wonderful liberal arts kind of education, but much more classical at the time. But it started with this kind of conversion of Native people, and then settlers' children started coming here, and young men started coming to Hamilton College, and it continued to grow. A couple other elements, you can see the Lombardy poplars very early on. There were some landscape elements here. Those poplars were part of Kirkland's planting along College Hill Road from the very beginning of this plan. Here's the view around the end of this period that you would have had down into Clinton. It's a little hard to imagine now, right? You just see trees. You're just surrounded by forest, and that's a wonderful thing about Hamilton. But it used to be very much a college on a ridge looking down into the valley, and was very much attached and connected to that community. The second era, we were calling the horticultural campus from 1853 to 1893. And this era was dominated by two men, Orrin Root and Elihu Root, both of whom went to school here. One was a professor here, one was an early Secretary of State. And they both traveled the world broadly. And they went to Europe and they saw romantic gardening, English romantic gardening there, and they were enchanted with it. So when they came back to Hamilton College, they brought those values and those ideals with them. So the early sort of very functional pathways that Kirkland had laid out all of a sudden became meandering, winding kind of trails through the landscape. And they planted hundreds of trees and shrubs that they had gathered or found out about on their travels in Europe and all around, and really transformed the campus into a horticultural collection, almost a garden across the campus. And they started Root Glen, which to this day, I don't know if you guys have been down there, it's spectacular, continues to grow. And the Grant Garden and the Root Garden really harkens back to this era of Orrin and Elihu Root, who had this strong interest. It was also a time of Thoreau and transcendentalists, and a belief basically that nature was good and nature could craft and shape a young person's soul. So that was part of the thinking too, that this kind of naturalness of the campus was not only important for beauty, but was important to create the kind of morals and the kind of person that you wanted to come out of Hamilton College. A couple of developments during this period, you can see a second row of buildings. This dashed line was added behind that original row of buildings to the west, but still really preserving that view down into Clinton, down into the valley. And you can see that the buildings were carefully staggered in between the original buildings of the row to preserve, even from that second row, that view down into the valley. And you can see also that what was this lawn on the east side got replicated virtually the same scale, shape, and size behind the first row of buildings, which became the first enclosed green space of the campus, what is today the East Quad or the main quad of Hamilton College. The next era, Campus Gothic, 1893 to 1942, is a long period. A lot of people were actually involved in this large era of development, but I'm going to focus on Beatrice Jones Ferrand. She was a landscape architect from the early part of the 20th century, very gifted, and she worked on colleges throughout the United States. She was very much in demand, and she came to Hamilton, and she brought with her a very different perspective. It was a perspective of Gothic design and Beaux-Arts design, and quite different from the romantic version of the roots previously. She envisioned a different way of organizing the campus, which was much more symmetrical and focused on these internal spaces. By the time she got here, the trees had grown up and they were obscuring that view down into the valley. And she really lamented that. She understood why the college was put where it was. And to that end, she couldn't really do too much about it, but she advocated planting high canopy trees and removing foundation plantings around all the buildings, really just to keep the ground plane as open as you could and preserve the visual connections across the campus. You can also see here that the college again expanded to the west and added another row of buildings. This time the athletic quad, moving into the 20th century, the buildings are much bigger. There's a new emphasis on athletics and health and wellness in colleges. And you can see it's interesting that that original proportion or width from the first foundation, that lawn all the way on the east, which was repeated as the green, then was repeated again as this quad to the west. Also, buildings were added at the north and the south end of most of these greens, further focusing the view interior instead of exterior of the college. You have this now a central axis running down the middle of these greens, especially the main green, which is from that Beaux-Arts influence that she brought to the campus. And at this time, really, the building started to reverse and transform from a view down to the valley to a view towards that green. And in fact, a lot of the buildings next to the chapel actually switched their doors from the east to the west, facing into the quad. That's how much of a transformation that really was during this period. Jumping ahead to the modern campus, the second half of the 20th century, of course, we had the introduction of modern architecture to the campus, which had a completely different approach to how to design campuses. And of course, Kirkland College was added in 78 to the overall Hamilton College. And the identity of these buildings was really one of sculptures within a woodland or within a wild kind of landscape. Each one of these buildings, particularly in Kirkland and over at Bundy, was an individual object surrounding a piece of landscape which was related to specifically to that building or a small group of buildings. And not to this idea that you had to have interrelated quadrangles, which were carefully orchestrated with views and axes. So it's a completely different kind of approach to campus planning. There was modern buildings on the north side of campus as well. Burke Library was built during this period by Hugh Stubbins. And that just goes to show you that this modernist language, although it was really focused on creating these sculptural kind of individualistic buildings, could also play a role in a campus. Burke Library very much grounds the main quad now and also connects to the adjacent quads as well. Last year, I'm going to talk about Campus Connects, we're calling this era, this Campus Connects because of Martin's Way, of course, which was the most important development during this most recent period of major improvements to the campus as a way to connect the former Kirkland College or South Campus to the North Campus with a very strong landscape move, this central axis, which all the main buildings kind of gravitate towards now. And the main buildings that were built in this period were built along this Martin's Way, or existing buildings were even modified on the South Campus to kind of receive this new landscape axis running across College Hill Road. The other thing that kind of came up during this period was a renewed interest in environmentalism, a very different and ecological kind of approach to environmentalism, as opposed to the transcendentalists. It was more based in science, of course, and buildings like the Kennedy Center were built around the pond, created pond with water that feeds Root Glen, really bringing that feature into the campus and making it more visible. And stormwater gardens became a prevalent feature on the campus and were built with each one of these new buildings that were created, as well as the reservoirs and some of the larger resources on the periphery of the campus were harnessed and brought in to irrigate fields. As Mike mentioned, we looked for principles that guided these different periods. This is just a example of some of the principles that we derived for each one of these different periods of growth. And I'm not going to go through any of these particular principles now. There was actually quite a few more than this, but it was a real kind of touchstone that we come back to over and over again as we thought about what makes Hamilton, Hamilton, what were the principles that were driving the main design decisions during these periods, and how important are they today? And they had different applications in different parts of the campus, as you can imagine, because different parts of the campus developed in different time periods. These principles applied differently and had different prominences in different parts of the campus. So we used those principles and kind of the characters that we saw to divide the campus into these zones or these character zones for future planning. The historic campus, which we're in now with Taylor just kind of on the edge of it. Contemporary campus to the west and wrapping both north and south, containing most of the modernist 20th century buildings. And then Martin's Way really has its own character and goals and objectives all on its own, which has to be thought about as an individual component. College Hill Road is very important, of course, not really part of either one of the sides of the college right now, but has its own individual character. And East Campus, which is quite removed and has some of its own challenges. Then working with Mike and the whole planning committee, we looked not just at these individual principles for different areas, but we looked for larger principles that might apply to the overall campus. And we called these the essential principles. And here's 11. I think we widowed it down to these 11, but there was quite a few more. And some of them are really baked into the structure of Hamilton, like, and exist here, like number one under the foundational principles, preserve the spatial integrity of the east and west quadrangles. That was just so obvious from day one when we came here, to preserve those quadrangles. And some of them are ones that we are working on. Number 7, the first one under aspirational, evolve the campus to a campus that is universally accessible is a lofty goal. That's one of those things which would be very difficult to achieve, but we'd really like to. And these principles have been baked into the plans that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. So the next section or part of this process was landscape priorities. And as I mentioned, we reached out to a wide swath of the Hamilton community, meeting with students, meeting with faculty, meeting with senior administrators, meeting with alumni, anyone really who would listen to us about the landscape. We really reached out to anyone we could. And what we derived from that experience was this list of the priorities, landscape priorities on campus, the things that were most important to address right away. And we divided those up into 4 categories. So pedestrian campus, the stormwater, management, plant management, and character and materials throughout the campus. This was a long process. We came up with a lot of different diagrams, analyzing the different systems that are working at Hamilton College and suggesting ways to correct or modify some of the issues that we saw. I'm not going to go through by any means all of the different issues that we saw, but I'll go through just a smattering of them to give you an idea of some of the things that we looked at. First, we start to look at the pedestrian campus, and this diagram here gives you an idea of just some of the broad categories of how you might start to address the idea of accessibility and making Hamilton College accessible. This green area in the middle of the campus that you see is pretty good. There's quite a bit. It's pretty level. Most of the pathways are within the boundaries of ADA slopes and ADA conditions. It's quite accessible throughout. But even in this green area, you have College Hill Road, this blue stripe going through the middle, and there's only one way to cross it. There's no other curb cuts or crosswalks or anything to cross College Hill Road. And that approach has changed over time. This is where we are right now, but it leads to quite a bit of division between the rest of the campus along College Hill Road. The area, the East Campus to the right on the screen, that purple area, which has a lot of housing for students, really very few accessible pathways from, if any, from the housing down there up to the main campus. It's a challenging part of campus, but it's part of campus that students really love. They love the housing down there. That's something we have to look at pretty carefully. The other areas, sort of the outlying areas, the sort of yellow areas, which are Root Glen and Rogers Glen, and the pink areas, some of these outlying fields, are some of the kind of amazing natural areas that are close to the core of Hamilton College, but very tough to get to if you have any kind of accessibility challenges. So in this plan, we've been thinking about how can we get people out there? How can people really take advantage of all these natural resources at Hamilton College? Next thing we looked at on the pedestrian category was vehicles. And here you can see some of the areas where vehicles frequently go and I'm just going to point out here that the two major quads, the east and the west quad, they'll close today, and sometimes they are closed with chains, are often open and often full of cars, and really, frankly, feel like roadways in the center of these quads. And that's something we'd like to control, and the college agrees that there should be strong controls over who can go in and use those quad spaces. So these red or orange rectangles that you see on this diagram are places where we're proposing to have gates, card access gates. So they'd only be accessible to facilities, people from the college or emergency vehicles to get in. To really strive to make that core of campus pedestrian free. And on the South Campus as well, the cars really can drive right in between all the dorms right now pretty easily, and that shouldn't be the case. It should really feel like these areas are preserved for student only use. The next area is stormwater, and it's very important. As you all know, storms are increasing, global warming is happening. These stormwater issues that we have now are only going to get worse. So we've been working with civil engineers to map the different watersheds on the campus and try and evaluate what the storm conditions are now and what they're going to be like in the future. Here you see some of the major watersheds on the campus. You see Kirkland Glen, that's the largest one to the west, Rogers Glen to the north, and then Root Glen. You can see how all the waters are collected and run into these three glens on the campus, into the valleys and down into Oriskany Creek. And then to the east of the campus, there's kind of a sheet flow just down those fields down towards Clinton. So this was an important step to begin to analyze how we handle stormwater on the campus. We've also been looking at planting quite a bit on all different levels. I've just picked one particular level to talk to you guys about, or just explain a little bit about, and this is evergreen canopy on the campus. It's something to think about. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful evergreen trees. I think particularly the South Campus, all the pines that are there mixed in between the dormitories give it a really wonderful and unique character and make it very different. You know, the dark side and the light side kind of nomenclature you hear, I think a lot comes from all those evergreen trees on the South Campus. Two issues did come to light as particularly important. One is number 3. That's the old burial ground on the campus, or cemetery on the campus. And it has a hemlock hedge around it, which was, when it was planted, it was to define this kind of cemetery defined as maybe like a 3 or 4 foot hedge. Of course, now we have 18, 25 foot tall trees all the way around it. So it blocks a lot of, one of the big things that blocks views down into the valley. We'd like to rethink that. Of course, that's a critical part of the history and legacy of Hamilton, but those trees have just gotten way too big. The other is the sports fields to the west, where I have a number 2 written there. Those big spruce trees around those fields are wonderful for blocking wind, but they also shed needles onto the artificial turf fields. And it's very problematic to the people trying to clean those and to students using those fields. So we're going to rethink that and come up with a new way to create some of that wind block, but also avoid that problem of maintenance. We've also been looking at character, and a lot of the character of the landscape is defined by the materials it's made out of. So here's an example of some of the walls. The purple are the stone walls, and green is concrete on the South Campus. We're currently working at Root Hall on the perimeter of the main quad, or the East Quad, and finding a new stone to make retaining walls at that site, which will blend with this historic brownstone of all the campus buildings around this area of campus, and kind of make that a model so we can make the central historic part as uniform as possible. We've also been looking at some of the artifacts and art on campus. We'd like to collect the art and really define almost an outdoor museum that starts at the Wellen Art Museum, spreads to the Kennedy, and goes down to South Campus, where there's already a little bit of art now, but really to celebrate the art of the faculty and regional artists of the area and the art of students, and really make that an active and dynamic outdoor art space for the campus. And also looking at these artifacts from the classes. They're a big part of the legacy of Hamilton College and alumni, organizing those in such a way that they kind of make sense, and you could walk through the campus and really understand the history of the classes that have been here before you. And we're looking at mundane things too, like the benches, trash enclosures, handrails, and really just thinking about how can you use these simple elements to find one bench for one part of the campus and another bench for another, to really define a character that feels strong and harmonious throughout the entire campus. With all that in mind, with the history, the layers of history, the principles that we derive from that history, and all those explorations into the priority areas, problems, and issues, we then moved into planning and began to look at some ideas for the changes and improvements to the campus. This is the landscape master plan that we came up with, really focusing on the core 200 acres of the central part of the campus. The whole campus is 1,400 acres, as you guys may know. So there's a wide range of forests and fields. Many of the fields are managed by farmers and other people on the periphery, and there's forest management plans, but really we're focused on this core central part of the campus where pretty much all of the residences and academics buildings are located. I'm not going to go into detail at this scale. We're going to zoom in to 5 key areas in just a minute, but there are a couple of systems that I wanted to talk to you about that we're addressing on a campus-wide basis. Number one are these views that I keep talking about. And although they've been largely or completely obscured by the development of the forest to the east of the campus, it's really a lot of the big trees on the campus too, on that eastern edge. And we'd like to look for places to restore kind of visual corridors, small sneaks views through those trees with judicious pruning of existing trees and just selective view clearing in some areas off to the east to try and restore some of those historic views and give students and everyone when they're on Hamilton's campus the idea, or just restore that idea that it's on this amazing prospect with this amazing connection to the larger landscape. The other views you see on here, the purple views and the orange views. The purple views represent the entry views, which are critical as you're coming up the hill or down the hill from College on College Hill Road. What you see, for instance, when you first come into the campus and you see the chapel, as soon as you see that chapel, you have that sense of identity that you've arrived at Hamilton, making sure that's kept open and thinking about views from the north and from the west as well. The orange lines are internal views of some of the resources on campus along Martin's Way into Route Glen that are also important for defining character and defining the identity and sort of sense of place for Hamilton. We also have looked at a couple just basic circulation approaches. One of them is a loop trail around the outside. I'll talk about more in a minute. But the idea, is there a way that people could actually walk around and create an ADA trail around the perimeter of the school? We think it'd be great if we could do it. On the eastern side of the campus, where I was talking about the ADA problems, really carefully grading in diagonal pathways down that hillside would allow ADA compliant connections from all that housing down there up to the main campus and make that a much more accessible and desirable place for students to live. And then also along College Hill Road, thinking of other places where we can cross College Hill Road. And one thing we've been doing carefully here is working with the traffic engineer to figure out where it would be safe to cross, how can we slow down the traffic, what are those critical places where students and faculty and staff cross already. I'm sure you've seen walking around here, people cross at certain places where there's parking lots or trying to get to their job, or there's students trying to get to class. They cross anyway, and there's no designation right now. So making that safe and making that clear. We've been looking at planting campus-wide. This diagram represents a basic approach to trees, and I know this is Arboretum lecture series, but we're not going to go too much into detail here. But The basic approach is this green area in the center of this diagram. We want to stress and utilize high canopied open trees like Beatrice Ferrand was recommending to keep those views open across the campus. And those purple areas surrounding it, we're almost thinking of that as a garden that kind of surrounds the core campus, and building off the Root and Grant Gardens to the south. This purple zone is really where all the housing is. And we see using smaller trees, flowering trees, which would help give a strong identity to each one of these places and create kind of more domestic feeling for each one of these residential areas. Along College Hill Road itself, you see kind of these staggered green and red lines. Two ideas there. One is that we want to mix the species, so we're not dependent on just one type of tree on College Hill Road, that we'd like to stagger them in long rows. There'd be a whole variety of species there, but that the red represents a place where we'd like to use very strong kind of formal columnar trees to give you an idea that you're approaching the campus. And then in the center, the green represents a series of canopy trees that would help to link the campus together. The orange that you see are the native trees in Rogers Glen and Root Glen, and we'd like to pull that through Martin's Way, really celebrate those native trees as much as possible on campus. This is a list of trees, which I'm not going to go into, but we have been looking at the Arboretum's collection, and will continue to work with the Arboretum to develop these consistent list of trees for the campus that really stresses native trees throughout. This is a diagram of some of the stormwater initiatives I've been talking about. And there's really three basic areas. Root Glen, we've been building stormwater gardens, and you'll see those areas that have kind of the pink dotted circle around them on the left-hand side. That's where we built stormwater gardens already to capture stormwater that's coming off parking areas and buildings and infiltrate it before it goes into Root Glen. And we've been working on an initiative to protect that resource and capture all those stormwater flows going in there before they go down and create further erosion of Root Glen. Along the east side, you see all those long blue lines there. Those are stormwater rain gardens that we'd like to install to capture any of that water that's flowing to the east and downhill into Oriskany Creek and into Clinton before they leave the campus from buildings, from paved areas, from parking areas, and infiltrate them back in the ground. Now I'm going to focus on these planning areas that really we think are key to improving the campus and bring to bear these principles and this history and these priorities that we've been looking at. One is to re-envision College Hill Road. Two is to secure the heritage. What that means is look at the core of campus and really secure this historic structure that's there and improve it. Three is to look at residential spaces across the campus and think about how to improve them. Four is to create a welcoming northern gateway, which really just doesn't exist today. And five is about how to build upon the strength and uniqueness of these two very prominent glens that exist on the campus, Rogers Glen and Root Glen to the south, Rogers Glen to the north. So I'm going to start with re-envision College Hill Road as our first sort of planning focus area. What these diagrams show is in purple major opportunities that we saw in these areas, and red some of the key principles that we're applying to the plan. For this talk here, I'm just going to talk about the opportunities just in the interest of time. The first one for College Hill Road are to create these secondary crossings. And I can point those out in a diagram in just a second, but we think there should be 4 or 5 more additional crossings actually on College Hill Road where we see people crossing, and we'd like to make that a controlled and a very deliberate move to allow a much stronger collection between North and South Campus. As I mentioned, we've been working with a traffic engineer to figure out ways to slow traffic. And we'd like to use signage, of course, but also sort of landscaping and pedestrian language along the edges of the road to just signal to people coming to Hamilton that you've entered the campus, that you get to a point where you're driving and you know, this is a place I need to slow down. Students will be crossing here. I'm on Hamilton's campus. We've looked at the potential of speed tables. We've looked at the potential of just patterning the pavement with different kinds of materials. So we're continuing to explore that, but we really think that's an important part of making College Hill Road part of the campus. Right now along the south side of College Hill Road, there's a long stretch where the sidewalk is right next to the curb, which you guys know if you walked around, that's really not a great condition. Kids, if there's a lot of snow, they can end up walking in the street. We want to pull that sidewalk back. And then there's overhead electric lines on the south side, which are not very attractive. And it's an ambitious goal. There's a lot involved in burying those electric lines, but it's something we'd really like to do. Here's the other crossings I was mentioning before, just so you can see where they are. And we'd love to kind of create this strong connection across the north and south campus. And this purple zone is really what we see as an area we want to slow down the campus. Those two red markers on either side, we want to symbolize with gateways or pillars or something to really say, you've entered the campus, you have to slow down through this zone. And here's a section through College Hill Road showing above the existing condition and down below some of the improvements we'd like to make. Most importantly, or most obviously on the south side, moving the sidewalk back away from the edge of the road, creating strong rows of linear columnar trees along the two edges, and possibly putting up some kind of low fencing or walls or something along the edge to control where students cross as much as we can, or just to encourage them to go to the places where we're going to have pedestrian crossings. The second area I wanted to talk about is the campus core and this idea of securing the heritage. The most important thing to do in the campus core, we feel, is to make that main quad feel like a pedestrian-only quad, to remove cars from that area entirely. We really like to remove service vehicles as well and just have it open for emergency vehicles when needed. And the way we see doing that is to change those roadways in East Quad, the central quad, really to the scale of walkways, and then improve or enlarge the pathway on the east side of the chapel to a wider path where you could bring vehicles if you needed to service vehicles along that east side instead of servicing them from right in the middle of the campus, right in the middle of that precious core. We also feel like that would enliven that east lawn right now, potentially, by creating the opportunity to bring food trucks or mobile stages or something to that area and make that a more active part of the campus. It's not very heavily used, but it's really one of the most beautiful places on the entire campus, that big east lawn in front of the chapel. The other idea here is to capitalize on and extend this most historic part of the campus, which is the lawn and the chapel and the three buildings adjacent to it, across College Hill Road over to the Root House and the Root Garden and the Grant Garden and all that historic, really magical landscape that exists on the south side of the campus. We'd like to do that with pathways, additional crossings coming across College Hill Road, really bringing a low hedge maybe at the edge of this east lawn, jumping right across College Hill Road, so you feel like these oldest and most important historic pieces of the campus are connected in one integrated whole. And then maybe even creating a visitor center out of a studio that's right next to Root Glen there, number 4, so that you can see and have more visibility of Root Glen. And if you want to go to Root Glen, that you see a visitor center that you could go to and park at and go down and explore. Here's a diagram of some of those key principles of isolating the main quad, moving vehicular traffic around it so that really stays preserved and protected from vehicles, and creating a strong connection between the east lawn and the historic gardens and Root House on the east side of the campus, on the south side of the campus. Third, looking at residential spaces throughout the campus. There's some great housing here on Hamilton, and we really just want to look for ways to enhance what's here primarily. Looking at the houses on South Campus, as I mentioned, these modernist buildings each have their own kind of interior courtyards, either for each individual building or for groups of buildings. And right now we're looking at ways to just make them more hospitable spaces for students, creating seating areas, creating picnic tables, plantings, gazebos, places for students to get out and gather outside in the courtyards of those buildings. And we've been working with alumni from various classes to provide funding for this, and we've started this initiative in the South Campus. Closer to the main part of campus, next to the number 2, we envision there a potential for a really new residential center on campus. That's one of the prime spots that we think could work. And that came out of an earlier residential study on campus. And we really think that's a great spot to bring the students closer to the heart of campus and closer to those central greens. To the east, number 3, this residential village. This is another spot we think could be a great location for additional housing on the campus. And the idea now that exists down the hillside a little bit behind the existing housing. Right now, that whole area is parking lots. And the idea that you could create a new green there and a couple new residences there and have this new kind of village kind of feel to the housing in that location, we think would be wonderful, bringing students closer to the heart of campus, to the library, Taylor Science Center, and really giving them their own kind of small village feel in that area. And again, starting to take advantage of those historic views down to the east, down into Clinton. Number 4, in that area I mentioned by Shenandoah down there, there's some wonderful small dorms there that students really love. We see enhancing that with a couple other small buildings in that area and really creating, again, some outdoor spaces where students can gather. So they're in their buildings or in their dorms, but they feel they can come out and meet other students from the other dormitories in that area or other housing facilities in that area, and make that feel as much as you can like a village. And the same thing for Bundy. You have, like the campuses on the south side of campus, you have this interior courtyard. It really just needs to be enhanced with planting and places for sitting and gathering for students to use that space more effectively. Here's a quick diagram just to show the idea that for each one of these locations on campus, we envision kind of these orange spaces being almost outdoor yards for the students to use, but also that they could have these kind of green spaces, which are larger communal spaces where activities could happen that would help students from the different dorms in those areas come together for communal activities. Number 4 is the Northern Gateway. And as I mentioned, this has become more prominent in recent years. The sports facilities have really grown and developed and blossomed in this area. And also with GPS, everyone having a phone and trying to figure out how to get to Hamilton through GPS navigation, a lot of times it takes you to this spot now. So as where before you might come up College Hill Road, a lot of people are coming in from the north now. And there's a couple of things we're looking at doing here. One of them is connecting to more directly to the parking to the north. There's a large parking lot just off the screen to the north here that a lot of students use. How to connect to that more directly and pull students off of the road, and people coming to events like today who use those lots so they get more quickly off the road and into Hamilton's colleges, the main part of campus. We also see this as a chance to engage with Rogers Glen. Most people don't even know that Rogers Glen is here. It's this wonderful natural resource on the north edge of campus that you really can't see very easily, but it's a huge natural feature. And the idea that you might put another pedestrian bridge along this route that takes students up to those parking areas, we think would be a wonderful addition to this part of campus. The Center for Innovative Technology, it's called the Digital Gateway here, is a building that's in the planning stages right now as an addition to Hamilton's academic opportunities and academic centers. Really, we want to make sure that that building is placed in such a way that when you arrive from the north, you have these welcoming views into campus, and that building is sort of the first thing you see and really greets everyone coming in and signals that you've arrived at the central part of campus. And finally, just making this a threshold. How do you make this into a clear arrival point for people coming to Hamilton? There's a couple ways we'd like to do this. One is the idea that you just very simply create a gateway with pillars or trees or signage or a combination thereof. Those two red dots represent the idea that you would actually go through some kind of physical gateway or threshold that says Hamilton College on it. So you know, even though there are a bunch of sports fields beyond this, that you have one place where you kind of have this gateway into campus. And we'd like to do it here because it also combines with Rogers Glen and the idea of you're driving over this wonderful natural resource. Bring those trees up. That's what all these orange dots represent, the native trees and plantings from Rogers Glen coming up to the edge of the road. So you feel like this arrival zone is this whole kind of orange rectangle that celebrates the native plantings of Rogers Glen along with that kind of clear gateway. The orange pathway here is the new way to pull people off of the road and get to that northern parking area. And the last area I'm going to talk about from this master plan is this Link the Glens initiative. And this is maybe the most ambitious part of this plan and incorporates the idea of that link loop trail around the entire campus, which I mentioned earlier, which we see as being an ADA accessible pathway all the way around the outside of the campus, 2.4-mile trail. And this would do a lot of things for the college, both for its identity and for its students. First of all, it gives students access to all the amazing natural resources that exist around the perimeter of the campus. To the northwest, you have the former golf course, which is being converted into wetlands and marshes by students and faculty on the campus. And then you have Rogers Glen, which I've mentioned, to the east and running along the north side of the campus, this great resource that nobody really knows about or has access to. This trail will give you easy access to that. To the east, running along the east side, you have this wonderful woods flowing down towards Clinton, and the idea of creating new fields and meadow habitat along that edge we think would be great. Coming down, crossing College Hill Road, and then coming down to Root Glen along the south. This trail would give you much easier access to Root Glen and then to the South Campus, running around the outside of this South Campus perimeter and engaging with all the fields and forests that are there. There's a whole huge collection of fields and trails there running all the way over to Kirkland Glen. So that provides this wonderful access to natural resources. It's also a trail, kind of a health and wellness trail. The 2.4 miles of accessible trail would be great for running, be great for walking, be great for snowshoeing, cross-country skiing. So we see it being used throughout the year by students. It would also tie directly into the Johnson Health Center and a new labyrinth, which is under construction, and the idea that it would connect students in the health center directly down into Root Glen, that this becomes part of the health and wellness place for students to get away, for contemplative thought, and just get away from the campus itself. This trail also would provide new habitat as it wraps around. We envision a series of hedgerows along the whole perimeter trail, particularly along the east and the west side of this trail. And we also would be tucking in some parking along the east side. You can see these small parking lots on the right-hand side. The reason we're proposing those there is that we're displacing or would be moving some of the parking from that proposed housing on the north side of campus, that new kind of housing village. We were looking for a new place to put parking that'd be a little bit further away, but would still be convenient. And then we can envision these as not big parking lots, but kind of little outdoor rooms in and of themselves that would have stormwater gardens associated with them, that would have trees and really feel discreet in the landscape. And finally, we'd like to propose at the end of Martin's Way, what's labeled number 5 here, kind of outdoor amphitheater at the end of Martin's Way that would step down into Rogers Glen so that everyone that's using this main spine up and down Martin's Way would know at the end you have a direct connection down into Rogers Glen and this great resource, which is today not utilized at all. This trail, of course, ties into a series of other regional trail systems for Rogers Glen to the north, Root Glen to the south, and Kirkland Glen to the south. All of these are wonderful trail systems, but they're hard to get to right now. And this new trail would allow easy access for everyone to incorporate these larger trail systems. And that's it. That's where we are with this plan right now. I appreciate you guys listening to this presentation. I hope you guys learned a little bit about the history of the campus and some of the ideas that we're thinking of to improve this beautiful campus that we already have. And open for questions. Yes.
The existing inventory of deciduous trees on campus must have some degree of vulnerability to the increase in the temperature over the next 50 and 100 years.
Yeah.
You have to be looking that far in advance.
You absolutely do.
So how do you think about that?
Well, you think about it that you have some opportunities and you have some losses. So as it gets warmer, for instance, white birch tree have to progress north. So you kind of start to lose the viability of some trees that need that condition. But at the same time, you might be able to get, right now we're zone 4, and it's a struggle to get Florida dogwood to grow here. They barely hang on. But if it gets warmer in the next 50 years, you might be able to bring that native plant onto the campus. So you just have to think about, it's hard to predict how much of a temperature increase we're going to have, but you can begin to see some of the trends with these species that are right on the brink of their zones of hardiness. Another question?
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
This is very interesting. Thank you for this.
Sure.
I want to preface by saying I'm a landscape architect in New York City.
Oh, great.
So my question is based on what we do in New York down in the city. When you talk about universal access, I was a little bit surprised by the zone that was considered very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have been commenting a lot this weekend about how accessibility is segregated off to the side in many locations from main entrances.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's not universal access. And
Yeah.
so I know that there's a lot of old architecture, there's a lot of obstacles that are challenging because of existing conditions of buildings and the grades. But I guess my question is, I hope, or maybe it's my hope, that there's an intention to move forward with design that allows everyone to experience the arrival, the access in the same way. And if stairs could just be wholly avoided at all possible, and if you must have stairs, they'd be incorporated into the ramps and vice versa, so that no one has to walk 30 feet that way to get to the same destination.
Yeah. Well, that's a great comment. And it's one that pretty much every college and university of Hamilton's age is struggling with. And you're right, there's a lot of places, particularly at buildings, that are not universally accessible right now. I can say that Hamilton's working on it, building by building, to address this problem. Mike, it seems like you want to mention this. We're working on it at Root Hall right now. Figure out a way to do this. Yeah. You want to say something about that?
I do. Yeah. I mean, that is a very good comment. And this ideal of universal accessibility is the natural landscape and into the built environment as well. So, Glen's focus obviously is how do we increase accessibility throughout the campus? But when it comes to the buildings, right on the heels of the landscape master plan, we are currently in the throes of a comprehensive facilities master plan where that same principle is being embraced on universal accessibility. And to Glen's point, there is no better example of our commitment to doing this than Root Hall, constructed back in 1897, Carrera and Hastings. I believe I've got that right. The duo that were the architects for the New York Public Library, Midtown Manhattan, started on that building as soon as the ribbon was cut on ours. And so you got a 125 plus year old building. And when we go in to renovate, one of those things that there's really two things that we're looking at doing for all of these major renovations. The first is to get off of fossil fuels. So Root Hall, we had geothermal wells drilled, and now the benefit of that is we've got a much more energy efficient way of heating our buildings in the winter, but also the benefit of cooling our buildings in the summer and the extended warmer period into the fall that we're seeing now. But also accessibility throughout the building an elevator where one didn't exist. And Root Hall only had one entrance to the east side. Now it has two entrances. If you walk past that building, its main entrance is now the west side, where we've got a nice incline that just marries beautifully with steps. And that is the primary entrance, to your point, where everybody has one entrance and one entrance only. So I rest assured that that is the ideal that Hamilton is striving for, and with each successive renovation, what we intend to achieve.
Thanks, Mike. Another question?
We have a question over Zoom from Stefan. The question is, how and why do you decide to use native trees in some places and non-native in other places? And what percentage of native versus non-native does the plan envision overall?
That was a question about native versus non-native trees and
Yep.
what percentage. Well, as you know, Hamilton is an arboretum, and there are a lot of non-native trees planted right now. So although we as a general rule, like to plant native species throughout the master plan, and that's our intention, to plant primarily native species. But we don't want to be unsensitive to the idea that an arboretum is also about kind of an encyclopedic collection of plants. So I'm gonna say that's a relationship that's evolving with the Arboretum Committee in terms of how many what the collection is currently, maybe where they'd like to develop certain species and certain genuses to add some trees to the Arboretum collection. But in our minds, that would be a pretty small percentage of the overall planting. Some of the plantings that, all of the plantings that we're envisioning for this, this Link the Glens kind of ecological zone around the perimeter of the campus would be all native trees. We'd love to celebrate native trees all along Martin's Way and make that a spine of native trees. And so really, if I had to put a percentage, we'd love to, you know, do 80% native trees and just preserve a small percentage for building on the Arboretum with additions to that collection. And it's be able to, as I said, it's a dialogue, but our intention is to plant as many native trees really as we can throughout the campus. Yeah.
I have a question. One was about the mention about pine needles falling on the
Sports fields.
artificial turf. Are there any thoughts about converting the artificial turf to regular turf? Because I know that in the NFL, that's a dialogue that was triggered recently by some injuries, season-ending injuries. You know, that maybe we need to convert some of these fields into native turf and safer for players.
In our discussions with people in athletics, there hasn't been any discussion about going back to native turf fields or building native turf fields, just because it's logistically so much harder to maintain those fields and make sure you can keep the schedule going and you don't have days of endless rain or snow, and then you lose practice, you lose seasons, you lose games with as compared to the artificial turf. So I think it's a tough sell, but I don't want to. Mike, do you have any knowledge of that discussion?
I do, yeah. So it's a great question, and certainly, you know, safety is paramount. But if it were only a field used for football, maybe that would be an argument that we could make and look seriously at you know, transitioning to natural turf. But you know, that is used for lacrosse, men's and women's lacrosse as well. And oftentimes we're plowing snow in the spring to make way for a game, and it's not logistically feasible. On the Needles, if we remove those trees, which we hope to do, how do we block the wind? We also hope to build a much nicer, taller stadium someday that is appropriate for college athletics and to take the place of those trees. So, but good question. Thank you.
Yeah. And another one is also about turf.
Yeah.
Is there a plan for, what's the plan for the ground plan in terms of like maybe cultivating meadow-like approach rather than reducing mowing just to save?
Sure. So I don't know if you've heard of the Green Attributes Initiative on campus, but there's a movement, there's a group called the Green Initiative Group that is working mostly within the confines of this area of our master plan to identify specific types of natural environments and change the maintenance regime on the campus to encourage pollinators and native plants and animals. And I brought along a couple pictures. This is right off the sports fields on South Campus. This is, you can see Rudbeckia coming up here. And this is an area that's been let go and seeded adjacent to South Campus dorms. And right behind the South Campus dorms, here's another area, a more shaded area where native grasses have been allowed to grow up. And if you zoom in, you can see there's a lot of wood aster, native wood aster growing in there, which is a great pollinator plant and native habitat within that area. So there is this initiative going on campus already, which is part of that eco loop that's kind of running around the whole perimeter of the campus to incorporate these ideas. And Hamilton's getting started on this. You'll see these signs around campus that talk about this change in this kind of mowing regimen and this kind of aesthetic change that we're trying to create on the campus. Because it takes education. A lot of people see it and say, oh, that looks messy. But it's really, you know, it's very valuable. It saves money, it saves resources, brings back native plants and animals, and, you know, in large areas it can be done. So it's a great question, and it's something that it's an initiative that was really came up from students, I think, mostly, Mike, and it was worked on with faculty in the environmental sciences department as well as facilities. So it's alive and kicking, this Green Attributes program. Now, we're really encouraged to see this very beautiful change that's happening on the campus. Another question?
So I'm also interested in what this woman was going to ask about following the first question. Didn't get the chance to ask. And maybe I could ask if you want us to ask. And I could
Go ahead.
It's sort of they cut on.
Sorry.
Regarding accessibility, there needs to be accessible parking close to buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if you're you have accessibility issues, it's hard to get to Wellington Hall, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
for public performances. It's
Yeah.
you have to be able to walk something a fair distance, because there is no parking really adjacent to the building. And I know it's supposed to be a pedestrian campus, but it also needs to be accessible.
Yeah.
And when they tried to put a polling place on campus, they could not find a place that was sufficiently accessible.
That's great comments, and definitely, we will take that to heart. I think a lot of it has to do with really evaluating the parking that's on campus right now and determining if, like you say, there's not enough of it designated as accessible parking. Our goal is always to make it a pedestrian campus, but we know that some people do need to park, that there needs to be that accessible parking. So giving over more of that parking to accessible spots and pushing student parking, who we know can travel further out, is something that we need to look at more closely.
So that's a perfect segue to what I was about to ask.
Sure.
So my son's a senior, so this is 4th year. I've done this to move him onto campus, and he's lived on the dark side 3 out of 4 years. First year was horrible. And so I'm really curious about this limit of vehicles into these quad areas, especially on the dark side,
Sure.
which I'm most familiar with. And given this question about accessibility, not everyone can carry themselves from a car that distance. A lot of us can, but I'm just generally there's a large group of people, like even this weekend, who are trying to get close to the dorm to pick up or drop off stuff as they're visiting their students. And how does that work with this key card restricted vehicles system on these particular kinds of days? And will they have access to be able to drive up to drop off and pick up?
Yeah, it's
full of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a clearly a logistic issue, and on move-in day and move-out day, the gates would all be open, and beyond that, we'd have to, today, maybe a good example, maybe there's a need for more access on days like today, if we know a lot of parents are going to be on campus, to have more of those gates open. Yeah.
I mean, to help us understand the change that would happen with the quantity of new planting, new trees, what might be the tree canopy percentage increase if the grand plan is actually realized in the end?
It's a good question. I haven't thought about that specifically.
I don't know, is there a rough number of how many new trees would be incorporated into this plan?
Oh, that's another tough question. I mean, I could imagine thousands. I don't know. We haven't gotten to that level. We're starting like piece by piece to do some of these projects. I can give you an example of one that we recently completed. The idea, this is at List Hall, and we're trying to create these kind of small, more intimate outdoor spaces where students can gather and really take advantage of the landscape. So, we've added probably 20 trees here, including some apple trees to harken back to this time when the South Campus was completely an apple orchard. And if you get over there, I know it's not a great day, but they're really tasty. McCown's and McIntosh over there. So we'd like to bring back all kinds of trees, and really as many as we can. So that doesn't really answer your question, but that's up to Mike, how much we can invest. We'd love to bring thousands of trees,
I'm sorry, this is my third, but
That's fine. Landscape architects in the audience is fantastic.
But he asked a question that's very relevant to the question I was planning to ask, which is about the trees. Again, landscape architect in New York, we try to preserve trees as much as possible. There's a lot of motion around trees, and when you cut trees down, people get up in arms, and then there are people who don't want the trees there at all. And then I see good reasons for reorienting trees and tree species and alignments in LA's, all that. But, so this is my question. When you plant a new tree, at least in my contracts and our budgets, it's usually under 5 inches. It's usually a small tree. And so you don't get the same basal value benefit of the huge trees you're removing. So I was curious, how big will the new trees be, and how quickly might they, because we may not see it in our lifetime, but will they be budgeted for much larger calipers and what a typical tree might be to help establish what you're trying to achieve?
I'd say the answer to that is probably no. I mean, as a general rule, we don't plant trees more than 5-inch caliper, and even that's kind of pushing it, except for very limited applications, because the disruption to the tree takes a long time for it to regenerate roots that are lost and really start to pick up pace again. I will say, though, that we are very reluctant to remove or cut down any mature tree at all on campus. I will say we'd like to limb some up, quite a few. There's a lot of trees on campus right now that block your views across the campus. They're wonderful trees, some magnificent beech trees and others that really fill space that we would definitely want to keep, but we'd love to see them raised up a little bit in the Beatrice Ferrand's kind of vision of this kind of open, at least in the center of campus, historic part of campus.
Yeah, because really we only do like 3-inch trees, but 5 is like the max that we can push it to. So.
Yeah, that'd be about the max for us too.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, landscape architect.
Then we check these people.
But I think that planting the smaller trees better. The whole take is 5 inches, in my experience, and something.
Yeah, I think that's certainly right. The only time we ever use really big trees on campus is frankly when we have to take down a big tree, and people just really need to see the investment and that you're replacing trees. But typically, like the vision for this this ecological zone around the whole campus, that would all be 2.5-inch caliper, maybe 1.5-inch, maybe whips, really to plant groves and thickets and around that perimeter. Another question?
This is I happen to live on Griffin Road.
Mhm.
And over the years, there used to be on the northeastern side of that road, there used to be quite a row of trees along there, with them gradually been dying, being removed. Is there a plan to replace some of those trees along that road?
Well, I guess I would say that that would have to do with our strategy for the sports fields along Griffin Road. And I don't know how close you are to the sports fields, but thinking about how to create windbreaks for those that are not big spruce trees would be part of that. In terms of a sort of perimeter, that edge of campus, like a street tree planting, we haven't been thinking about that, but it's a nice idea. We would like to have that perimeter path come through there. So we'd like it really to be native trees along that as part of that that circuit trail.
You don't necessarily want my view destroyed.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, we have to be sensitive to that.
That road is right there, right for the main.
Are you asking where Griffin Road is?
Yes.
Let's see if I can point that out. Right. There's Griffin.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
So Krista, do we have any questions coming in on chat?
we just had the one.
Just the one?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we got time for maybe one more. If you've got a burning one.
Any other landscape?
From someone who's not a landscape artist. Okay. Well, again, I want to emphasize that Hamilton in partnership with STIMSON has really swung for the fences here and envisioned a future that is going to just take what is already a beautiful campus and enhance it and make it that much more special. And there are things that we're going to get after in the short term, like maybe those automated drop arms to preserve the pedestrian core on most days, maybe establishing gateways from all of these different approaches to campus, and then others that are going to take a much longer time to realize. The Holy Grail is probably burying those power lines along College Hill Road and realizing a 2.5-mile loop around campus, but we're certainly here to dream big, and we're gonna keep working at it. So I want to thank Glenn for making the trip from Boston. Yeah. And for really being a strategic partner with the campus. I mean, you know, you're probably one of the first people I met when I came aboard, and I think we talk very frequently and collaborate often, not only for this plan, but a lot of other initiatives going on around campus as well. So you'll probably see Glenn here at Hamilton taking a bite out of apples a lot more often. So anyway, with that, thank you all very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I just want to stop down. Greenhouse and burger.
Yeah.
Eventually will grow best. Native plants and.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be meeting with Sarah, so I can.
Yeah.
Honestly, we would love to just integrate these plans for facilities into the classroom as much as possible. And
Yes.
making it better.
And that's what we working with the biology department too, and I.
Oh, it's great.
Cut it down.
Oh,
Yeah, it's already happening.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
You maybe see.